Well, yes, maybe a little longer than the last couple of weeks. There were two problems, as I recall it. The first was legislative apportionment. The Democratic Party was very strongly associated with the AFL-CIO, and Gus Scholl was the leader of the AFL-CIO, and he was dedicated to getting absolutely pure one man, one vote. The convention, which again was controlled by Republicans, came up with a proposal that was put into the proposed Constitution that would do that in the House. But in the Senate, it reserved a little bit of the representation for area. That and the fact that Romney at that time, who was a delegate, was thinking of running for governor, caused the entire Democratic Party organization to oppose the new Constitution. And we had a battle royal. But that, as I say, was towards the end of the convention, and I'm quite satisfied that the Constitution would not be what we have today without the active participation in a bipartisan way of those Democratic delegates during most of the convention.
In crafting it.
Yeah. And by the way, Tom, this is the first edition of our state's Constitution, adopted almost 50 years ago, and I'd like you to have it.
Thank you, Gil. That's beautiful. Of course, I have the more recent versions, which would include several amendments, that have been tagged on.
Yes.
But I thank you very much. It's beautiful. And when we're done, I'm gonna ask you to autograph it. And it reminds me, I interviewed another Con delegate a couple years ago, one of the ones from Kalamazoo, Judge Glenn Allen. Did you know Glenn?
A good personal friend.
And
yes.
He was on this very program.
Well, how about that?
It was a few years back, and now he was one of Kalamazoo's delegates, and he had been the mayor of Kalamazoo, and I think he represented that city district probably much like you did. He probably had a very similar experience in coming to the convention.
And he was very proud of having been mayor of Kalamazoo.
He should have been.
He mentioned that a number of times during his activity. But he went on after the convention to be a major force in Governor Romney's cabinet, and was his principal legal advisor at one time, and I think also in charge of budget
at one time
before he finished his long career as a judge of the Michigan Court of Appeals.
That's right, and I believe he served, and you would have had various committees at the convention. He was on the local government committee, so this township question, he would have wrestled with that. What committees were you on?
I was on two committees. I was on rules and resolutions, because one of my strong interests was parliamentary procedure at that time, and I was on legislative powers, which, as it turned out, had more sections to consider than any other committee in the whole convention, mainly in all of Article 4 and a few other sections throughout the Constitution.
Now, the convention met at the was it the Civic Center?
It was, but it was the south end of the Civic Center in what we called the Veterans Auditorium. It was a much smaller auditorium than the main auditorium in the Civic Center, and because it had a stage on one end, it was very suitable for holding a convention because the stage could be used for the press box.
I saw recently a very short documentary made of the convention, and there was there were images of the convention itself. There were people in like a gallery, a public area where people came in. It looked like some students, and one of the points that was made was President Eisenhower came and spoke to the convention at one point.
Yes, it was a big thrill when he came out and gave a quite inspiring speech to the convention, which was picked up later and used to make a film to explain the new Constitution to the public.
Yep, I think that may be a part of what I've seen. And now, were some of the committee hearings held on the road, or were they all here in Lansing?
All here in Lansing, I think. I don't believe that we had them out on the road. We were too busy.
And people could come, the public could come and testify?
Yes. Oh, yes, that's right.
Did that influence your decision making?
Well, it depends upon the quality of the testimony. You see, nobody's running for re-election in a constitutional convention. So The political dynamics are quite different from, say, the House of Representatives, where everybody, if they want to continue a political career, has to think, well, I've got to keep, one ear to the ground about, what's going on politically. We didn't have to do that, or at least not as much. And so it was basically, did these people have real facts, and did they have real arguments? And most of them did, I should say. Occasionally, someone would come in, they just wanted to present their point of view, and that was all right, but they didn't have very much influence.
How long did the convention meet for?
7.5 months.
Was that full time, or I mean, here you are, you're a lawyer. I mean, you had a practice. How did you?
No,
what happened with that?
Well, I campaigned on the basis of being a full-time delegate, and I was. I left the practice of law before it started, and I went back into the practice of law after it was over with.
Did they meet pretty much then full time?
Oh, yes.
4 or 5 days a week?
That's right. Yes, indeed. And it was pretty arduous work. As I say, we went from October in through to May, and then we had a big gap until the last day, because during that gap it was necessary for the Committee on Style and Drafting to make sure that they put the sections in the proper order and that they found if there were any inconsistencies that should be corrected. By coincidence, we adjourned on the very day that our salary money ran out.
The legislature set the salary?
Yes,
yeah,
they did back then.
Yeah.
And they gave us $500 a month, but I think it was a maximum of 7.5 months. And that's exactly how long it took.
That's interesting. Now, when the convention began, and again, I think you mentioned it, the delegates are free to organize as they see fit, and you chose 3, vice presidents and various committees.
Yes.
Did you start with the 1908 Constitution, or did you just start with a blank slate?
What we did was we discussed that, and the decision was made, we're writing a new Constitution. But of course, we're not ignoring the old one. But the idea is that we're not putting out the old Constitution as a motion and then amending it. No. We divided up the Constitution by subject into a number of substantive committees and assigned various parts of the Constitution to those committees. And then we delegates put in what in the legislature would be called a bill. But the bills were referred to the committees, and they stopped there. It was up for the committees to make recommendations of language for the new Constitution. They reported them out to the floor, and we voted on and amended them and gathered them into the new Constitution.
Were there provisions in here in the Constitution of '63 that you didn't support, but that were in there, and then you said, well, I want to support the measure as a whole? Is there anything you would have done differently?
There were, I'm sure now, thinking back, there were a few things that I voted no on, but nothing of major substance that I know I would remember if there was anything of major substance that I voted against during the convention.
We have a few things in our Constitution that are somewhat unique. Well, one, and maybe I'll just ask you about several. One is we have a prohibition on the death penalty, and of course that stems from our very first Constitution, and you retained that.
Yes, I wrote it. I personally wrote that provision, and that provision to outlaw the death penalty in Michigan passed that convention with only 3 dissenting votes. And remember, it's 2/3 Republican, most of them quite conservative, and it just shows how politics has changed in the last 49 years.
Well, the wind kind of blows back and forth, but today states that have had it now many of them are going away from it.
Oh, sure.
So
just recently, New Mexico did away with it. New Jersey did away with it.
So Michigan has always, has been on the cutting edge here, and many states are finally kind of following your lead.
Well, we were the first government in the entire English-speaking world to abolish capital punishment for murder and lesser crimes long ago. And so my feeling was, at the time of the convention, we'd been without it for 115 years, and I thought, because of that history, we ought to put this in the Constitution.